Hello and welcome. How you going? Campbell here from Autodidactic, and today we have Paula with us. And you're in Australia, and you've been studying Australian history, and a lot to do with Melbourne and Victoria. And so we're just going to have a bit of a chat about your journey down the history rabbit hole. So how are you going?
Hi, Campbell. How are you? How many times have we tried to get to do this? Hey, God, it's
I
been a
know.
nightmare.
I
I
know.
mean, we tried July, and then I think another time last week we tried again. But we're here now, so thank you for
Oh,
having me, Campbell. It's great.
no, thanks for
Um,
coming. I know.
yeah. So I've been doing this for quite some time, Campbell, as you know. I mean, I started off, how we know each other is from the Tartarian events, and I got up and talked to you guys about Ararat and the mental asylums up there, and some other things that I found on my boots on the ground week in the area, and been to every other Tartarian event and been a volunteer for you. And yeah, we've Kelly and you and I have grown to be quite close, which is wonderful, and we like to share our information. So I'm actually really, really, really proud to be here with you. I really am. You're a great man. So
Thank you.
where I started, Campbell, I started when I was very, very young. I always knew this world wasn't right. I always knew there was something here beyond what we're told to believe. I never really fitted in school either. And because I didn't really fit in much at school, I actually would start going to the cemetery, which was just behind, not far from our house in Lilydale. And I would find the oldest cemetery, the oldest gravestone. I'd be very, very partial to the histories of the children that died at very early ages and big families. And I would spend a lot of time in the cemetery, and I'd start cleaning these very old, again, the 1850s type era, and just spending a lot of time there. I actually felt more comfortable there than I did even at school or with my friends. And that journey led me to a journey of when I was a teenager. I started being very interested in the actual history of my town in Lilydale. And we had a beautiful, huge rotunda in the middle of the town, and our hotels were very ornate. And I was drawn to the history back then. I think I was about 13, 14 when I started looking at the history of Lilydale. And never really, people thought I was weird because, what's this 14-year-old looking at architecture, hanging around in cemeteries, there's something wrong with this person. But I loved it. I was so drawn to it. And I was very lucky in one part to have actually met someone when I was about 15, 16 who also had a love of history. And we would travel, he was 18, and we would go to Ballarat and Bendigo and all these country towns and Kyneton, and just look at the homes that were being built, the mansions that were being built in the area, and just we were both in awe of how was this possible? How could we have built these magnificent homes and magnificent buildings in the main street of Ballarat and Bendigo and all that area with not much tools and not much of anything really? And then I was lucky enough to be able to go into the underground of Ballarat, where, so you used to be able to take tours down at Ballarat, and they used to take you underground, and it was literally Ballarat, like Ballarat underneath. Like you would be walking along bluestone paving, there'd be window shops there, there'd be restaurants or cafes down there, all old world, and it was absolutely mesmerising, and it has never left me. The whole vision of that has never left. Now you can't do that, but a lot of the shops up there do have manholes that you can take, and they've got little ladders and they can take you down into those areas, but you really have to know someone now that will do that for you. But some people apparently still hold, like, I don't know, little festivals and events down there. So it's such a fascinating place. And the whole gold rush stuff and the Eureka Stockade, and it all just fascinated me. Every weekend, literally every weekend, Campbell, we were travelling up there and just visiting as many old places as we could. And then when that movie came out where the girls disappeared, I can't remember what area that was now. Come on, Paula. Anyway, there was a movie that was brought out. A whole lot of girls were in an area on that side of Victoria that had just disappeared in the rocks.
Picnic at Hanging Rock.
Picnic at Hanging Rock, which again absolutely haunted me, and I needed to go up there and have a look, which I did. The place has I think irrespective of the story, whether the story is real or not, the place has a very weird energy to it. And we spent a lot of time up there too, just having a look. So that never left me. And then I would walk through, when my parents would go into the city on a Sunday, that was our day out, going into Melbourne. And just looking at the buildings in Melbourne was just another layer again for me, just to absorb and to look at and to admire. And I always remember I'd be holding my mother's hand, and all of a sudden I'd be holding a stranger's hand. And it's like, where's my parents gone? Because I was watching the footpath so much because of all the brick glass blocks that you would see at so many steps along the footpath, and I was absolutely fascinated by that. And then when my mother took me down to the toilets, and it was all underground, and again another form of fascination, because you would have a lady literally standing there and getting a little coin donation to use the toilets, but the toilets were so ornate and so amazingly beautiful for toilets. So my fascination for Melbourne has been there for a long, long time. And, you know, as the years have passed, I've spent a lot of time in country areas and admiring architecture. And then, you know, bring it forward, and we've come into COVID, and all of a sudden, you know, we've got time on our hands, and we then have this old world, and you bring in the Tartarian story, and other people are starting to question our architecture. And it was like this huge, I don't know, it was a really weird moment for me. It was like, oh my God, that is exactly what I'd been feeling for so long, but I couldn't articulate what that was, and I couldn't explain to anyone what that was, because all of it didn't fit in with the narrative. And then when I started looking into the Tartarian, and look, I know Tartarian's just a term and it's just another rabbit hole, but the buildings are old world, and there's a complexity to these buildings, and they're everywhere. And Melbourne and the rest of Australia is no different. I mean, if you really didn't know you were in Australia at that time, you wouldn't know that you were here, because the architecture was like Europe and England and America, Canada. Yeah. It didn't matter. So it connected a lot of dots for me. And when we were allowed, and then I started doing my research, and it wasn't until Ararat that I was really, there was so much up there that I thought, my God, that's really connecting the dots. It's like that movie where the guy puts on the glasses and all of a sudden he sees a totally different world. It's not the same world that you've been. It's just the most bizarre feeling. It's like all of a sudden this whole veil's lifted and you've got these rose-coloured glasses on, and next thing you're seeing everything, you know, of the potential of what it could be. So that sent me down so many rabbit holes, Campbell, as it has you. And I remember connecting to autodidactics, and I remember you very early in the piece as well. And it was fascinating. You were absolutely an eye-opener for me as well. And I thank you for that. It was wonderful. So then and then I thought, okay, well, I'm going down. Where am I going to start in this rabbit hole? Because like you and I have discussed, once you start a subject, that subject just expands, and then there's another subject and another subject, and it just keeps going. So I wanted to concentrate on one thing that could sort of break the story, the narrative. And I kept going back to bricks. Bricks just can pull apart the narrative very easily. And I've actually come across another subject that would actually can tear it apart. So I started going down the rabbit hole of bricks, and I found a story about one of the first settlements to come to Victoria was two captain explorers that thought that the Coronella area would be a good place to start a settlement, the first settlement, in 1826. But there are already settlers in Phillip Island because there were the sealers who were already there, killing their seals, and had already started buildings in that area. And we already had the whalers and sealers in Port Fairy. They were building buildings in brick very early in the piece, in the 1830s. So the narrative tells us that that was the first attempted settlement in Victoria, was in Coronella. So apparently this two captains, explorers, brought 21 convicts, their families, and supplies for 6 months, some stock, and they landed. Obviously, if you've ever been in that Port Phillip Bay area in Coronella, you know that it's not a treacherous bay, it's a very calm area, but to get across the sand, you have to do it. It's just like marshland. You just sink into the sand. So obviously they only came in a small boat, apparently, but in that bow of that small boat, we had 10,000 bricks that they started us off with from Sydney.
10,000.
10,000 bricks, Campbell. That's quite a lot of weight, including a few cattle, and including supplies for 6 months, including 21 convicts and themselves and their family, and a few early settlers were all on this not a very big boat. So they would have had smaller boats to take the stock back and forth, and the people and the bricks.
Yeah.
But it's carrying those bricks, and they had nothing. I don't know if they had wheelbarrows. Maybe they did have wheelbarrows, but we're ploughing that through sand that's like quicksand.
Yeah.
So we've found a flat area, and we've also flattened an area, apparently, so that required a lot of shovels and digging.
Yes.
So we're tracing bricks, and we're trying to bring cattle into the area in this sort of horrendous, sand. Well, it's like quicksand. But yeah, like I said, they get to the area, they flatten a bit of a hill that they don't like, and they proceed to then decide to make bricks. And obviously the bricks were all handmade. They obviously had mould to put the bricks into. I don't know, it's not explained. And you just can't use a straight clay. There has to be some binding in there. So it's not really explained either. But they happened to make an extra 20,000 bricks. So we now have a total of 30,000 bricks. We now, hopefully the weather was fine. I mean, if we have our beautiful hot days as we are now for, a couple of months, not a problem. But if we're in rain, or if it gets humid or anything, they're very susceptible to the weather, because bricks need a definite normal like a temperature that's consistent to make them usable, or they just crumble. So we've made our 30,000 bricks, 20,000 on the land, and 10,000 from Sydney. We now are making a road, and we're also making a bridge. I don't know where the bridge is going to. It's somewhere where there's supposed to be fresh water. So we've made a bridge over to some land. I'm only assuming that land would be over to French Island, because it's the only other land from Coronella Bay over the bay to the island is French Island. That's quite a distance. So then we proceed to make some barracks for some soldiers that are there, and then we make a homestead. I don't know how big the homestead is, because none of this is there anymore. The clay pit's there, and it's quite small. And there's a monument still at Coronella to show you the bricks. And then apparently in 2 years' time, they decided it wasn't feasible. There wasn't enough water. They were starving. The weather conditions were terrible, and they left. and they left a whole stack of bricks, and apparently the settlers that were already there at that time decided to use the bricks themselves. So then you go into more of the story, and then you find the story of a captain, I think Michael Hart. And Captain Hart was also an explorer in the area and was very interested in the area. But he also settled in Coronella in the same time period. And they show you his farm with the clay pit that apparently was where the convicts were. So there's a bit of a conflicting story here. So there's two stories. The convicts made the extra bricks and the barracks and the homestead and the road, and left a whole lot of stacks of bricks when they left, because apparently another house was made from one of the settlers with those bricks. But then when you read the story of Hart, he had his farm where this clay pit was, and still is, and he produced heart bricks. So he produced these bricks that had his impression of a heart on the brick to represent his name. Now, the story goes that either the settlers stole the convict bricks, or that Hart started taking convict bricks, or the convicts actually stole Hart's bricks. So you're getting two conflicting stories.
Yeah,
So,
and the Hart's bricks are actually kiln-fired bricks, aren't they? They're not, because this is the thing.
They're handmade, still in the mould. Yes, there's no kilns at this time at all.
Yeah, but
nothing.
But that's what they're telling us.
Yes,
But some of those heart bricks are still around, aren't they? And they are definitely kiln-fired bricks, aren't they? They're not, because this is the thing, when you dry, like handmade bricks is one thing, but it's the drying of them, isn't it? Like,
it's the drying of them.
Yeah. If they're
they
not
have special names.
They go out of shape and they're not usable, and they, like you said, they crumble. And these heart bricks are still here, like 100 or 200 years later, right?
Yeah. Well, you can't see. You can only. There's one. There's only one in the one. There's one collector that's got a heart brick, and there's in the memorial at Coronella. You've got a few of the convict bricks, and you've got the heart brick.
Yeah.
So, as I understand it, with brick making, they still made the mould. Handmade bricks were the governor of the time, because Victoria and New South Wales, there was no Victoria. There was only New South Wales. And the governor of New South Wales at the time had told any settlers, because they really didn't want settlers in Victoria. They tried to keep them away from Victoria for as long as possible. And people were refusing to. And people were actually arrested coming to Victoria to try and settle, because they didn't want them here. And then the governor said, well, if those settlers wanted to stay, then all bricks had to be man-made. There was no help with bricks. There wasn't going to be any bricks brought over or anything. So they all had to be handmade, and apparently 1 cubic metre of clay produced 200 bricks.
Wow. Okay.
That's
a lot of clay. So 20,000.
That's a lot of clay. That is a lot of clay, and there's no evidence anywhere in Coronella anymore of this this small house and any other houses that were built at that time. It's all gone, because apparently they pulled the houses down to use the bricks. So then we go into Melbourne, and also I have to also add, most of the surrounding areas and regions of Victoria, we're already getting settlers. By 1830, we've already got settlers. So we've got settlers on the Yarra in around 1826. Living with the Aboriginals. And the Aboriginal story is another one that we'll go into another day, which is another narrative. But anyway, so I started looking into the earliest brick home in Melbourne. And there's a lot of conflicting stories about that one too. And the best knowledge that you can get comes from this book, which is about a lady who wrote about Whelan the Wrecker.
Ah, yes. You've mentioned this book to me. Whelan the Wrecker. Yes.
Will and the Wrecker. So
Yes. Daughter.
on page 11 of this book, it talks about the bricks of the early Melbourne. And it says that bricks were very, very scarce in the early days and brought over from Van Diemen's Land.
Nice, which is Tasmania for anyone not from Australia.
Yeah. So we brought them over from Van Diemen's Land, and we only had enough bricks. Hey?
Across Bass Strait, right, which is one of the most treacherous stretches of water in the world.
Exactly. And, of course, in the bow of a boat or the hull of a boat. So the weight. But anyway, there was only just enough bricks to make chimneys. So there was apparently soon there were brickworks that were established across the Yarra in the proximity of St Kilda Road. Besides supplying Melbourne with sturdy building stuff, the Brickfield district harboured a good deal of the town's small resources at that stage. By 1849, brickmakers were evicted from South Bank and everywhere, and their operations were shifted to the clay pits of Brunswick. Now, the clay bricks of Brunswick started in around, I think, the 1850s, but they didn't have a kiln. They didn't get a kiln till a proper kiln, a proper manufacturing kiln, till 1880.
Yeah.
And so the kilns they were using were the big fire pit type kilns, which someone has to constantly keep burning 24/7. And it was quite a dangerous job. And like I said, bricks are very temperamental. So even the Hoffman the Hoffman kilns that came over in the 1880 was only a circular one, so it could only manufacture so many bricks at a time. It wasn't until they made the big tunnel type kilns that you were producing massive amounts of bricks, and that was 1880. Actually, be later because they didn't come till later. So
well, 1890. It's
exactly. So the building surge sparked in the gold rush, quickened the demand for bricks, but they continued to be made by the old methods, pressed into moulds by hand until the late 1870s. Now, that's an eye-opener because a lot of these buildings were built before the 1870s. And some of these massive buildings were built before then. I haven't done a timeline on these buildings because so many, when you read this book, so many have been pulled down, and some of them deliberately, most definitely. Until the late 1870s, when mechanical production took over, output increased tenfold during the Melbourne boom decade, but wasn't sustained, to meet the demands of the bricks, because apparently they arrived on site already warm or hot, so when they tried to lay them, they deformed.
What? That's a strange little story, isn't it?
There's a lot of strange little stories in this book, Campbell, like you would not believe. So, so it increased tenfold during Melbourne's boom decade, and the brick business was strained. Even so, to meet demands, bricks were sent to building sites still hot from the kilns.
So when was this boom decade? Because I thought Melbourne's boom decade was the 1860s. That's when it was the richest city in the world, right?
I know. This is what I mean. It's just...
And then there's a lot of discrepancies in the story, isn't there?
There is so many discrepancies, Campbell. I can't even explain to you how many, because I'll read one book, and I've also got old books. If anyone thinks it's not coming from an old book, I've got an 1858 dictionary of Melbourne, of all the businesses around in 1858. And I've also got my hands on the Britannia 1875 I've also got a very rare book of the Gippsland area, and whenever I go to the op shops or second-hand shops, I'll pick up lots of colonial stories about Melbourne, or I'll pick up mansions of the National Trust, which are the people that historically, protect our old buildings. And even their stories don't match up to the narrative. So it fascinates me. It really does. So, so we're delivering hot bricks, which are causing disfigurements that no amount of stucco could hide.
No,
no amount of stucco could hide.
But they also wouldn't be standing today. These big, amazing buildings, like you can't build unless you've got, rectangular, geometrically rectangular bricks. That's the whole purpose, right?
Exactly.
Unless you're an Aztec putting them together. But I mean, so it's just weird that they would add that in, because they can't explain the bricks anyway. So why would they add in a story that sort of makes it even worse for their position, right? Like, not only can they not explain the bricks, but half of the ones they were producing didn't work. It's very weird.
Exactly. And it gets weirder. Look, some of the stories in here, we're going to have to do a deep dive on, Campbell, because there's one building in this book that blows my mind, and it absolutely will blow the narrative, along with a lot of other buildings, but that one definitely. I think it was a Colonial Mutual building. That is something we have to do a deep dive on, because that one absolutely is amazing. And the story to that is just, it'll blow your mind. So so this is happening with our bricks. I will read you this. The earliest records of bricks and manufactures, 1926, settlement in Coronella, which we've covered. The bricks made in Coronella were actually supreme to the Sydney bricks at the time, far superior. So Coronella brick industry and others that followed in a few years later in Portland and Port Phillip Bay were based on handmade technology that is primarily used of non-mechanical methods to take clay through the stages of brick production and details. So apparently there was a guy called Dobson who wrote a whole piece on the brick making in that time in 1850. And I have to find this guy, obviously, in the library, which is another stage I'm going to go to. Although major improvements were made to bricks by 1850s, moulding and firing in Victoria, it seems that they had little influence on the brick industry. That was written by a man called Lewis in 1972. It's only in the 1870s that the adoption of tech occurs with the use of brick machinery and the Hoffman kilns of the late 1880s. Those changes resulted not only for a better brick that was more durable and was consistent in size, but also an increase in the number of bricks produced. Much of the 1880s housing of Melbourne was constructed by extruding or dry press brick. Now, a press brick was a very mobile little machine on two wheels that had what was called a metal plate on the bottom and a frog. So what happened with that clay that went into that pressed piece of machinery was that the steel plate was actually how they pressed their name into the brick. Okay, the frog was a piece of timber. So that's when the brick comes out, it's got that like a hollow in it.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you had the extrusion of bricks. Now, the extrusion of bricks meant that it was literally like a pipeline. So you would push the clay through the pipeline, and as it came out circular, it would then have wires that would cut the brick shape, which is how you got those perfect edging bricks. So I've got photos of all these machineries, but that was the only way they could mass produce bricks, was to actually extrude it through this tunnel.
Wow, a lot of wastage, but okay, fair enough. I guess they feed it back in, but wow, that's an interesting way to make a brick.
It is. And then they had to try, and then somehow they would have like a flat, like a pizza arm, I would think, to pick these wet clay bricks up and put them in the kiln to dry. Now, the Hoffman kiln, apparently what would happen is it would have an ongoing 24/7 fire that they would have to keep burning to keep it at a constant temperature. And you would have channels coming off that main funnel where you would put the green bricks, and the heat would then circulate and dry those bricks at a consistent level. There'd be other sections coming off there where you would be able to put wet green bricks again, so that then you would just move them as they were going and getting processed. You'd move those bricks. And apparently they could do up to 70,000 bricks a day using that system.
A day?
A day. Yep. But you had to do that process, Campbell, you needed, I was looking at the labour that you needed at that time, and the amount of people that had different jobs at those brick industries was amazing. Like, from memory, I think it was like 20 or so people had different positions that they had to do and they were responsible for the process of those bricks to come out the way that they needed to come out. And that didn't allow for the bricks that didn't come out properly.
Yeah. So how are they doing that? I mean, what's the output of a brick maker today? Do we know?
I haven't even gone to today. I don't even, I really, I have to go into that.
Seems like a lot of bricks to be making in a day in the 1880s, was it? Like 70,000 is
late 1880s. It was a lot.
Yeah.
You're going back, and then people say, well, yeah, but come on, Paula, you had so many brick makers or brick places in Melbourne and the surrounding areas. There was enough of them to produce those bricks. Well, there might have been, but they were still making them the old-fashioned way, and they didn't have kilns. What? The only way they could fire these bricks was they made a huge fire pit, and it had a special name. I think it was called a pludger or pugger or something. It was a pug. That's right. And they would have to build that fire up to get the intensity enough to get it right for these bricks. Then they would have like shelving around the pit to lay the green bricks onto. And someone would have to man that 24/7, and and a lot of people died because they had to literally be in that fire to make sure that the temperature was right. And they were there at night with apparently, whatever lighting that they would have had to keep that type of firing going. So I'm not an expert on the brick making, but I've read enough to know.
It's crazy. It doesn't make sense. Like today it says a brick maker using a machine can produce anywhere from a few hundred to several thousand bricks per day. Depending on the machine's capacity and the operator's efficiency, the output could potentially make up to 1,000 bricks in a single day. That's today using modern machinery. 10 machines, but I mean we're so far behind 70,000 that's ridiculous.
Exactly. So is that another narrative, is it?
Oh, well, 70,000 bricks. I mean,
it's a lot of bricks, isn't it?
It is, but
and when you think about the
so many bricks, don't they? There's so many brick buildings, and each brick building's got hundreds of thousands of bricks in it, if not millions. And they've got to account for it somewhere, and they don't, I guess, expect people to go back and research brick making in the 1800s, right?
No, exactly. And you know what, too, Campbell? Apparently, Victoria sits on, or Melbourne especially, sits on a balsamic, not balsamic. I'm going to say the wrong word here. What's that? I know. Excuse me, everyone. I have isms. I can say things that are pronounced. I think they're right in my head, but doesn't make me less intelligent. What's that rock that starts with a B? The
bauxite.
Yes.
Bauxite's iron.
No. It's anyway. That's where they got all their bluestone from. So it just doesn't go into the brick story. And apparently before we even got settled with bricks, we were laying foundations and we were building bluestone and like a sandstone building, because the area was so full of, that's why Victoria, they reckon, was the best, because we had so much clay for bricks, we had so much bluestone for foundations, and we had so much of this limestone, that's it, area, that, it was perfect for building. Now, to get off the track a little bit, the 1870 and 1880 Royal Exhibition buildings, which is another deep dive we have to do because I've found so much, Campbell, will blow your mind. The foundation for that, the bluestones were so thick. This is going to freak you out, because I said to my husband, "You're 6 foot, aren't you?" And he goes, "Yeah." I said, "Can you imagine a foundation being 6 foot wide?" And he said, "What?" I said, "Yeah, apparently the bluestones for that bloody exhibition buildings were at least 6 foot wide, and they had to build a brick wall the same width."
Wow, that's a lot of bricks.
6.5 million bricks, Campbell.
Wow, that's a lot, right?
6.5 million bricks, yet the Crystal Palace of Sydney only required, of London required 2.5 million. So 6.5 million bricks built in a year, under a year actually.
Yeah. Oh, of course, it's a World's Fairs building. And that's
Exactly.
not even, they don't like to talk about the fountains and all the waterways and stuff either, do they?
No, they don't.
So, yeah, they're saying it's a massive building. So you would imagine that all these old world massive buildings would have, they'd have to have foundations like that, right? Just because of the weight. But they never, that's one thing they never talk about, right? They don't talk about the foundations. Oh, they just built them up.
Yes. Now, on that one, just quickly, and then I'll go back to our bricks, but apparently the Royal Exhibition building was left derelict for quite some time, and there was a huge push to have that pulled down and removed. But all of a sudden they decided to pump all this money into it, and all of a sudden it's a World Heritage listed building. And if you put the two and two together, the reason why they could not get rid of that building is how are they going to explain 6 foot bloody bluestone and a 6 foot brick wall?
Yeah.
They can't.
Yeah, who's moving the bluestone, right? Like, I mean, and bluestone's heavy as far as rocks go, right?
Absolutely.
Like 6 foot wide blocks. I mean, they're not moving that in the 1880s or 87, or late 70s, wasn't it? With the tools that they tell us they had. There's just no way. It's just literally impossible.
Bluestones is another place that I want to dive into one day, because the bluestones that I've seen, stairwells of bluestone, I mean, like you said, the weight, we've got bluestone edging here and they're not even big, and yet there's some here that hubby and I have to pick up together. There's no way one person can pick it up. They're big pieces of bluestone.
Well, we'll have to have a look into the quarrying. How exactly were they quarrying and moving this, right? Because, I mean, you probably find every building everywhere for bluestone. Is that what they say?
Yeah. Castlemaine is, 2 hours from Melbourne by car, or an hour and a half by car. So, yeah.
Couple of weeks, with a horse and buggy and no roads. Jeez.
And the weather, it still has to be perfect. No. Can't have mud, Campbell. We can't have rain. Well, you could have a tandem of bullocks or whatever bullocks they are. You could have tandems of those.
I mean, even if you did, like, it's, that's not the problem, right? You could link up, 20 bullocks if you wanted to, but the problem is the cart. How much can you actually put in the cart? Maybe 2 or 3 of these big bluestone blocks, right? Like just the standard size. but anything else is just going to snap the wood, man. It's too much weight. So
That's right. I
you
just,
know,
it just, it's, look, we're not even started, and that's what I mean. We have to do a deep dive on these World Expos or the Expos in Melbourne, because we had granite and marble. So,
and that was the second expo too. There was another one in 1861. Is that right?
I found out, Campbell, we've had 2 Expo attempts before 1854.
Wow.
Then we had, yes.
18,
Then we had,
wow.
one in 1861. We had another one in 1879.
Yeah.
We had another one between one in 1858. We've had quite a few.
Wow. Okay. Well, yeah, we should do a deep dive on that. Everyone kind of knows Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, maybe Adelaide and Hobart. But then there was 3 in WA,
Yep.
you know, some in little outback towns. So, I mean, who knows how many there were, right? Like, really,
Yep.
they only want to tell us the ones that we've got evidence for, because, you know, the more
Exactly.
experts get out, the more questions get out. Like, how did you do this? Like, how are you building this? And of course, they say, well, easy. It was just wood and plaster, right? It was all fake. It was just built to be pulled down, except that, you know, some of the buildings are still standing and they're definitely not made from wood and plaster.
No, well, look at the one in Melbourne in 1880 with the 6-foot bloody bluestone. That wasn't coming down in a hurry, was it? That's why they couldn't pull it down.
And how oversized is that? It's
That
like
is so, and that's
it's 1 story above ground, isn't it? But the ceilings are like 100 feet. Like
exactly. But then,
it's
you know what, Campbell? We're going off the, like we knew we would, but I've done a search on architecture, and some of these architects that have supposedly built some of these buildings, they were in there, some of them were in their early 20s. And then I thought, okay, early 20s, we're a builder or an architect. We come from London, we come from England, but where did you learn to be an architect? So I
none of
looked up, how does one become an architect in the 1800s? Well, there is no school. There was a school started in 1888 that they decided they might need to teach some form of architecture and design. But no, these people just drew their designs, threw them in a competition, won a competition, and next thing they're building these huge buildings that you need to structurally know what the weight consistencies need to be. You need to know what you're dealing with, as opposed to, you know, like, I'm not an architect, but I know there's a basic design that you need to know something
well,
so that the bloody thing doesn't fall.
yeah, well, civil engineers. That's what civil engineers do. So you need civil
Yeah.
engineers as well, right? Because the architects really just design them. I mean, they should know, you know, if it's feasible. But yeah, Francis Greenway from Sydney, who built, you know, half the old world buildings in Sydney, same story. He was in his 20s, and I think the story says something like his uncle was an architect, and that's it. That's all you get. Like, no school, no study, nothing. And he's here suddenly, you know, because he's uncle's an architect. Suddenly, he's the best architect in Australia and designed all these buildings, right? So it's such a dumb story. Yeah, we should do a deep dive into that as well.
So I did this architect story. I did a little bit of diving last night into it, and there's no schooling. There's nothing that they do. Half these people don't have parents that are architects, but if they want to build these buildings, they need to go and look at the architecture of Greece and Italy and spend time in these countries to look at how the structure is built. And then do a little bit of hands-on as a builder or a contractor. And then, waha, you're off. You can go anywhere in the world and start reproducing these huge buildings because you're experienced. In what? I'm just as experienced and I know jack shit.
Yeah. It's like all these you know, designs that we get. You know, they show us, oh, look here, this is the design for the building. They're just floor plans, right? And elevations. That there's you can't build a building off what they give us as plans, what you can find, around about all these plans. It looks so much like they've found the building and they've gone in and they've drawn the floor plan and the elevation. That's it, right? They've just drawn what they found. Like,
exactly.
you can't build from those kind of mistakes.
Well, it just to me, it proves that they're renovating and they're just going by whatever's there, by what they've seen, and they're just reproducing that or doing something to add to that. But there was a story in this one again, which I found fascinating. And again, it goes to the Colonial Mutual building. That building, Campbell, is just, if I hadn't read this book, I would not have known about it. But for Wheel and the Wrecker to pull down any buildings, he went to the wherever he needed. I don't know where he went to, the council or the library, state library. But he needed to have original construction plans so that he knew how to pull these buildings down. Not just a drawing. Not just, he needed elevations. He needed to know what products were used. He needed to know what he was dealing with as a fully laid out construction plan that we all need to have when we build a home before he would quote on his buildings. Most of those quotes were done by guesswork because guess what? Most of these major ones earlier had no construction plans. They had none.
It's weird because they should have only been built, like 50 years prior or something back then, right? Of construction. So
yes.
You would have thought there'd be more information than what we've got now, but it's not. And
But
just this point, you know what novate means? As in renovate, like renovate. Novate means to replace with a new contract. Replace it with a new contract. So literally, they were renovating, they were renovating these buildings. They were just claiming them and creating contracts saying, now I own it. That's a renovation, right?
Exactly.
Just stealing, basically.
Yes. So when I get someone that says, come on, Paula, you can go to the State Library in Victoria, you can pull out any records you want to show you that building had a plan, a design, the architect, the builder, the construction company, and what it took to build that building. Obviously, there's not, because if there was, Mr. Recker would have had his hands on it, and he would have been able to quote proper quotes, because he lost $230,000 on that building.
Yeah, right. Trying to pull it down.
It nearly sent him broke.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like, I don't know what they're going to find, right? What if they find 6 foot wide bloody bluestone foundations there?
And that man pulled down thousands, Campbell. And this is another thing. We're destroying buildings in 1880 when we're meant to be in this prime. Why are we pulling down all these buildings?
And replacing them with crap. And there's so many stories of buildings being built and then torn down, like within 10 or 20 years.
Oh, and sooner.
And sooner, yeah. Some are a couple of years, right? Oh, we didn't need it anymore, so we just pulled it down. I mean, that doesn't, you look through what we can see of history, where they get to points where they don't use buildings, they don't just leave them. They don't even bother pulling them down unless you replace them with something. But then you've got double the cost. Like, if they don't need the building, what are they replacing it with something for, right? They've already got a building that's like, it doesn't make any sense at all, that whole narrative.
Doesn't make any sense. No. And then you've got the mansions. You've got the mansions here. There were mansions everywhere, Campbell. And I was blown away when I read that book. He literally was starting. That's how he was getting started, was pulling down the mansions in Melbourne, central Melbourne, outskirts of Melbourne, St Kilda, even mansions up in what's called our Dandenongs. We had massive, and we've still got one up there, Beechworth, which is huge. Now we're talking the Dandenongs. It's full of ferns and and scrub, and it's not an easy place to get to. It's so hilly, even driving in your car on a road, let alone build these massive mansions.
Yeah, man, pull all the bricks uphill with bullocks, man, and wooden carts, you know. That's how they did it. No roads.
That's how they did it.
Yeah, well, it'd be good to see some pictures of those, because, I mean, I guess that they're like the Fifth Avenue type mansions, right? Then they all got destroyed as well, right? They all got pulled down.
Yep.
But they were just crazy, some of those places.
I've got a video that's an old painting of Melbourne, and it's the original Melbourne 1854 exhibition building is in the background. But when you look at it, there is so many big houses already built in this painting. And they've also got a telescope observation tower.
Yeah. There was one in Perth too, back in the 1800s. Yeah, like this observation. Yeah, right. Which you would think would be old world, right? Like they knew what was going on with the stars and all this kind of stuff, right?
Yep.
We don't.
Now, I've got photos of an etching of the actual Melbourne I've gone blank. The telescope, Melbourne telescope.
Yeah.
Made out of iron.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah, wow. That's another thing on trains, right? I mean, there's just, like you say, there's so many.
We're doing deep dives on all those subjects, Campbell.
Yeah. Cool. Well, let's do it.
Yep, the electric tram. It's all going to come. So anyway, we'll go back to these bricks. Apparently, with this great book, she contradicts herself so many times. I love it. Like, you look at the first page of this book, Campbell. I'll show you. I was in absolute awe. Where are we?
Yeah, we can see a bit of that.
That building is so big, and they're just standing up there, you know, just hammering themselves with big sledgehammers.
Okay, yeah, I can just see that.
Crazy stuff. But yeah, from the first page, I'm underlining, putting little ears on the pages. There's just so much. But she talks about, so our land was so-called put up for sale in Melbourne in 1837. We didn't become Victorian until 1845, and it was called Melbourne. And before Hoddle even, I think it was Hoddle that made all the graphs and made up all the streets in Melbourne, where his design of all the streets are going to be.
Yeah.
We had a cottage. Already made out of full brick and bluestone foundations again. Now, that cottage, when Will and the wrecker went to take it down, he had trouble with that too, and it was only a little 2-bedroom cottage. He couldn't believe how thick the walls were and the foundations, and it took him, again, longer than what he expected. And that was a cottage that was already there before Hoddle started drawing up his designs for the streets.
Yeah.
And that was before 1837.
1837, yeah. Well, they found some now buried, right, when they tore another building down and they were building digging the foundations. And well, I think that what's the narrative? They're saying that they were the first houses that people built, and then people forgot about them, and somehow they ended up underground. But
no, what happened was that
hundreds, right?
Yeah, what they in 1920 was the first one they discovered. And Will and the wrecker apparently got the picket fence from that and put it in his backyard. Now, they were ripping down an old church, and they found the foundations and this picket fence. Their story was that very early in the piece, in the 1840s, there was apparently no sewage or anything, so there was a lot of stench in Melbourne, and they had a lot of floods. So that's another thing. We had a lot of floods in Melbourne that put Melbourne underwater. So they then decided that they were going to lift Melbourne up, and all the houses that were there then, they could just be put underground. And they said that that was part of what they found, right? But then Mr. Record says that some of the foundations were very deep and really didn't fit the narrative, because it would have been that they said that they didn't use a lot of dirt to bring the ground up.
Yeah,
then there was another discovery in 2017 where they found bluestone foundations again under another old building that Mr. Recker had pulled down, and they were going to put a sky-rise building there. And again, he mentions that the foundations were very deep under the ground, and they were thick foundations. And there was another one that would happen in 2021 where they were pulling down an old building, and for some reason they had, whether they have to or not, I think they have to have archaeologists on standby now when they start taking down buildings. So there was quite a few archaeologists on this site, and they started finding artefacts. They stopped that site for 6 months. Now, I had a friend of mine who showed me a video of a friend of hers that was living in a high-rise building, because everyone was locked up in these high-rise buildings. And these people were still on that site when we were all in lockdown. There was foundations, thick foundations. He filmed what he saw. They were thick foundations, fireplaces, and it was like an apartment building because there were lots of rooms and lots of fireplaces. And there was at least 20 people on that site in lockdown, all with their little brushes, all looking, taking photos. And then, and I have to find this for you, Campbell. I don't know, I've been racking my brain trying to find out how I'm going to find it, but I'll find it. There was one news report from Channel 7 or Channel 10 that were allowed on site when they resumed. They were allowed to keep going, and they were going to cover this foundations. And she said, is there a timeline? Do they know how old this is? And he said, 1645. And she said, what? 1645? That's impossible. And he said, yes. And that was cut off. And we never heard any more about it again from any news reporters or anything. And I saw that with my own eyes and heard it with my own eyes. It was shared everywhere at that time. So they covered it over with concrete, and they promised the Melbourne people that they would preserve the artefacts that were found and put in a glass cabinet in the foyer of the new building. How nice.
I know, right?
What they wanted to see.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That they're not gonna, show how deep the foundations or anything like that are. It's all a cover up, right? And that's exactly what they do, right? They just cover it up with concrete and go, well, here's something we think we can explain. So look at this. And
exactly, that's exactly right. Yep. Look over here, but don't look over there. Crazy stuff.
Yeah, man. Yeah,
so we've got these brick buildings.
Yeah. It's the old magician's trick, right? It's really all they've got. They use it for politics and TV and history, and they don't really have a good repertoire of tricks, do they? They just use a few of them really well.
Hence the reset. Too many is the waking up, Campbell. I think this is just a constant thing, Campbell. Every time we start to wake up to the crap and their tricks and everything and distractions and start saying, nah, it's not going to work anymore, they think that's okay. We'll just reset the place and we'll just bring in the children again and start all over.
Yeah.
It definitely feels like that.
Oh, for sure. I think that's where we are, man, right now, right?
Absolutely. And you know what? It's getting boring.
Yeah, man, I
I mean,
know.
if I look at it's like we've been here before. I feel like I've been here and I've seen it all before, and it's just so familiar, Campbell. It's bizarre. It really is bizarre. But you're getting directed to places all the time. And that's what I was saying to you. I'll just get directed to something that I haven't even thought about. But when I start looking into it, I think, oh my God, here's another one. And then here's another one that I going down that makes sense. And you're constantly being directed by some unseen force that's saying, you've got to go here. This will add up. This will make this add up. So I love it. I do love it.
Oh,
It's
for
so
sure.
exciting.
Yeah, man. It's like being Indiana Jones.
Yeah, I always wanted, and you know what? Since a kid, I always wanted to be an archaeologist, but I never
Yeah,
thought
me.
I'd have the brains to do it.
Yeah, I thought about that too. That was my only choice, but yeah, I don't know why I didn't go down that well. I wasn't
Yeah,
really into the education system, shall we say? So
that's it, exactly. But hey, we're here now. We're doing the same thing.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, I
yeah.
love my boots on the ground.
And we're not programmed, right? With the answers already, we're actually looking for
That's
answers.
it.
So
Yeah, that's what I love. I love being here. It's boring to some extent because you feel like you've seen it all before, but on another extent, you know that expanding your mind and expanding, and everything now is a question for me. Everything is just, okay, so why, how, when? It's just fascinating. I love it. It gets me
yeah.
up every day. It's wonderful. So there's a lot to talk about for Melbourne, as you can see, and
Mm.
we even have an early home, 2 cottages, Campbell, in Mr. Will and the Wrecker's book, that even before the land sales, there was a large portion of land that came up for sale that already had 2 existing brick and bluestone cottages on it that needed to be removed if anyone wanted to build on it.
Yeah.
So how long were they there for?
Yeah, yeah, they shouldn't have been there at all. And why do they need to tear them down? Why couldn't someone live in them? What's the deal there?
Obviously, they didn't fit the narrative, and obviously they didn't feel that they wanted them there. They needed them destroyed for whatever reason. Maybe it, again, had more proof.
It's just another dumb story, right? Because they're brick, and the narrative will tell us that most houses back then in the 1830s and 40s were built of. Luckily, if they were lucky, they'd be wood, right? Otherwise, they'd be like mud and wattle,
Exactly.
right? Like,
And that would make more sense, wouldn't it, for that time period, that they were making out of the wood that was available, and they were making shingle out of grass or whatever, because, you know, we're led to believe they were quite, like even the convicts, none of them were laboured people. They were
no.
convicts that were of no light. They couldn't even read or write. They were, so
Yeah, yeah. But they could draw plans for buildings.
exactly. And they can become governors too. You know, one of our major builder and architect was a convict, so for Melbourne.
Oh,
So go figure.
heaps of them were, man.
Heaps, heaps. So I'll
Just
just
yeah.
give you a little tiny timeline of Melbourne. So in 1846, this is going away from our brick buildings, we had the Botanical Gardens was founded. In 1847, Melbourne was declared a city by the Queen. In 1847, the Building Act, there was a Building Act came through based on the Sydney Building Act of 1833. Melbourne's hospital was founded in 1848. Yet I have a directory that puts the Melbourne Hospital being opened a lot earlier from an 1858 directory. 1851, discovery of gold in Clunes. Now, this is another good story, and you'll love this one, Campbell. So in Clunes, it was they discovered gold. I found a little book in an op shop that talks about discovery of gold by a gentleman 11 kilometres before Ballarat in, I don't know if I'm going to say this right, in Buninyong.
Yep, sounds right.
Now, the story, I laughed when I read this. I had to read this to my husband because I couldn't believe what I was reading. So the story is he was the first discoverer of gold, yet I was led to believe the Chinese discovered the gold. So this gentleman was a blacksmith in this little town 11 kilometres before Ballarat, and he was definite there was gold in the area, and every day he'd go out with his pick and shovel and bucket and go out and pick the granite in his area to find gold. And every time he did find something that resembled gold, the village would laugh at him and say, that's fool's gold. It's not real gold and you're an idiot, and give up. But this guy wasn't going to give up. And one morning he woke up with his crowbar and his bucket and thought, I'm going to find gold. So he walked through the scrub for a full day and ended up at the Murray River. Now, my husband and I looked at a map, and the straightest direct route from where he supposedly lived to the Murray River was a Echuca. Now, that is a long trip by car. And I believe, I think it's like 300, 400 kilometres to Echuca from Ballarat. Don't quote me on that because it's a while I read this. But he was meant to walk this through the scrub in a day with a bucket and a crowbar. When he got to the Murray River, he saw a great big granite rock and he slammed his crowbar into that granite rock, and lo and behold, he found a nugget of gold.
A nugget inside a rock. Wow. Okay. That's interesting.
Isn't he clever? And he couldn't wait to go back to his little town and show everyone he wasn't that stupid. He actually found gold.
Okay. And that started the gold rush, eh? Well.
Yes. Apparently.
I mean, it's like they've written it so dumb that they're sort of telling us, for anyone who wants to look, they're just kind of saying, look, it's all crap. None of it makes sense. Because why would they put that in there? Why wouldn't they put the town closer to the river? It's just
maybe they knew this time was coming, Campbell, and maybe they thought, well, hey, we've got to entertain those awakened ones while we're doing the reset, because maybe they're just getting a bit too smart for us.
Maybe it's
but
all
who
just
would believe that?
Yeah.
Who'd believe it, Campbell?
Well, I mean, I went to school in Victoria for 3 or 4 years of primary school, and I never got taught any of this. We got taught about the Eureka Stockade, right, and Ned Kelly, and that's about it for Australian history, right? A bit of Captain Cook maybe, but that's it. You don't
that's
get taught
it.
anything. They just don't want us to look.
No. And yet that whole Eureka Stockade, that's another one that I have been wanting to go down, because we had so many wars, Campbell, in Victoria and the rest of Australia. Terrible wars. I personally believe the Eureka Stockade was like, they called it a mutiny, but I believe that was another war. And maybe it was a war of all the original settlers here.
Yes. Yes, and that's another whole rabbit hole, right? Bushrangers.
Absolutely.
Why were they always fighting the government and the establishment? And yeah, man, were they already here?
We had 19 orphanages and asylums in Ballarat alone in the gold mining times. 19, Campbell.
That's dumb. I mean, geez, during the gold rush, no doubt they say there was a big population, but I mean, Ballarat's not a big town.
It wasn't that. And that's another thing. You look at the census. Australia in 1850, the whole of Victoria, there were 77,000 people.
Wow.
77,000 people. That's it.
Geez, you can almost lock all of them in 1,000 asylums.
I've got somewhere, I did have it here to read out to you, but I think in the 1840s and that, there was like 186 men and 27 women.
In Ballarat?
No, in Melbourne.
Oh, what?
Yes. See, this is what, there's just like them. I mean, if someone could work out a software system where we could put the population in, the amount of, how the bricks were done, the buildings that were built, you know, and even the goldfields, like the goldfields, they'll tell you that everyone left Melbourne. Why would you be building buildings at a time where you could be getting your fortune? So everyone left Melbourne. They had, all the police force had left Melbourne. They were left with 2 policemen to run Melbourne at that time because the rest had left to go and get their fortune.
Oh, gold.
So why would you be working your butt off, building these buildings, when you could be up there making your fortune?
Yeah.
You wouldn't be hanging around Melbourne.
No. It's 1850s though, so like it's across the realm too, right? Same thing in America. 1849 in California. It was about that time in Australia. Like the gold everywhere was all found in the same year, right?
Yep.
And everyone just went off and tried to make their fortune. And meanwhile, they were building these massive buildings in the cities, but there was no one in the cities. So
yeah, that's exactly right. And who made their fortune, Campbell? At the end of the day, they knew where it was. They knew it was another distraction.
Yeah, I think they had maps, you know, and they had to have known where the gold was, where the clay was, you know, like all these early industries, you know, pearls they had tin, all this stuff.
Yep.
Like Australia's a big country. You don't just walk around and just randomly find this stuff, right? Like there's too much distance to cover in Australia.
Exactly. So, well, I've got a little dictionary, Campbell, and that dictionary is a business dictionary for 1858 for Melbourne. Now, apart from a calendar that is already, which is at the start of the book, which has some amazing information on it, going from January through to December, because they celebrated lots of different things at that time. I did a little look in the businesses for that area, and I did a little bit of a count, because it shows me all the builders, all the architects, all the glass makers, everything, and every street the businesses were in. It showed you in this dictionary, directory. So for the whole of Melbourne, including the suburbs of Melbourne at that time, in 1858, we had architects and surveyors, there was 47. Builders, carpenters and joinerers, there was 93. Bricklayers, there was a whole four bricklayers.
Very busy bricklayers.
Very, very busy bricklayers, Campbell. Civil engineers, like we were talking about, there were 7. Contractors, doesn't say what type of contractors, just contractors. There was 10. Coppersmiths, there was 1. That's interesting, because some of our domes were made out of copper on these buildings.
Yep.
But there was another title called the Copper, Tin and Zinc Company, which there were 10. So maybe they were experienced. Engineers, doesn't say what sort of engineers, but there were 13 engineers. This will blow your mind, Campbell. Glass cutters and benders, 1.
When's this? 1858.
1858 in the whole of Melbourne and its suburbs.
Yeah, we'll have to have a bit of a dive on that, because there's a lot of glass in the Expo building, and this is the thing with glass. If you're looking at manufacturing, they might have been able to make it, but how big were the sheets? Like most of the time, like we're talking little, little like stained glass type stuff.
Cubic glass.
Not big like, square meter sheets of glass like we see in the Expo building.
But it's not the only one that had a glass roof, Campbell. When you read that will in the record book, there was quite a few that had glass roofs and glass domes.
But there's still a couple of things there, and a few arcades as well that have got glass roofs and things.
Yep.
So glass is another one, man. Glass, bricks, iron, all these industries, when you look into them, they just destroy the narrative.
Absolutely. But we had 14 gas fitters.
I looked into electricity, like the light bulb. Do you know when the light bulb was invented? Like the incandescent one that actually ran for,
Late 1800s?
1879.
Yep, we had electricity in Melbourne in 1860.
Yeah, and have you seen the photos of the Expo building in 1880? Completely lit up with light bulbs a year after they were invented.
Yep, in 1860, we had a few buildings that they brought over from England. They brought over the mercury light bulb and other light bulbs. They were testing them out.
Mercury.
So we've got a lot of gas at this stage. So we've got house decorators. There's 3. This is an interesting one. Your lime and cement merchant. Yes. Someone who would find all the lime and cement you needed, like a broker type person, because they had a lot of merchants in those days. So they were the ones that were finding supplies from Europe and bringing, and then the ship industries. But there was one.
To make the mortar for all the buildings.
Yes. One,
yeah.
I've got some more. But so we've got...
They wouldn't really have needed that many because the whole building was already, the whole city was already built, right, when they found it.
Exactly. So then we've got marble masons, so people that can cut marble and polish marble. Drum roll for 5.
Nice.
We have the mason and stone cutters. How many do you think we'd have at that time period, Campbell?
Probably 5, but probably hundreds of Freemasons.
Stone cutters and masons, there was 12.
12. Yeah, man.
Now, this was a big industry. There was a lot in this industry, and they all went under the banner of a painter, a plumber, a glazier, and wallpaper hangers. 82.
Wow. That makes sense, right? Because the only thing they were actually doing was renovating these buildings, right? So, of course, that's going to be the biggest. Yeah. It's interesting. It actually makes sense, those numbers, for our narrative, but it doesn't make any sense at all for their narrative. It
doesn't. And that's what we're here to do, because, there's people out there that'll argue this, historians will argue it, architects, but if an architect actually looks at the building and thinks how many years they needed to do to be an architect or a project manager or a builder, because there's so much involved, they'd have to look at it and think, hang on a minute, there's no experience, there's no schooling, there's nothing. How the hell did they build these buildings? And we've got no labour here that is experienced labour.
Totally. That's why we have architects, right? That's why a degree, right? So they can tell you what to think, and whatever doesn't go along with the story you've been told, you're just not even going to consider it, right? Because you're the smart, educated expert. Look at all the books, right? And it's, It's the same thing. It's like in Egypt. Like all the tour guides have to get licenses to be a tour guide.
Yes.
And the reason
Yes.
is they get told the story to tell and basically said, stay with this story, don't stray off or you'll lose your license. So they control the narrative.
Exactly. And I've been with the tour guys at Ripon Lee, and gee whiz, you start asking them questions or you start going out and go into a room that you're not allowed to, look out. I've been told off so many times in those places because I sneak off and go and have a look at what I really want to look at. And if you ask them questions, then they will get narky with you and they will ignore you. And yeah, it's a whole new ball game, that one. So how many plasterers do you think would be around in 1858, Campbell?
Probably lots. Plastering was needed to refurbish these buildings. 70.
Try 3.
Well, that blows all the money out of the water, doesn't it? Jeez. And
3.
how were they building World's Fairs if they only had 3 plasterers and all the buildings were made of plaster?
3, Campbell. I would love to get a directory of places like Chicago and find out how many of these so-called people that were so experienced in building could build that, and how many there actually was. This is the beauty of being here.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how many buildings they actually built around that time, right? How many buildings were they building a year in 1858 and you know, all that kind of stuff, because that would just destroy the narrative, right?
That's exactly. And this is why we need more people. Like, get out there, guys. Research.
Yeah, beats on the ground.
We need more.
Get out
There's so many rabbit holes.
Stuff's everywhere, right? So yeah, there is, man. It's like anywhere you look.
There's not enough lifetimes, Campbell.
It's easy to start.
I could only find 1 road maker, 6 sawmills, 1 sculptor to sculpt.
That was the guy with the driveway. Yeah.
2 truss makers and 1 town surveyor. Hello?
You go. What was that? Yeah.
It's going weird. We're going to have to, look, we can continue.
Let's do it again. All right. Well, I'll
talk soon.
All righty. Have a good day. I'll be in touch.
Remember, in the end, nobody wins unless everybody wins. Come on!